Welcome to the Dutch Podcast, where we dive deep into the science of hormones, wellness, and personalized healthcare. I'm Dr. Jaclyn Smeaton, Chief Medical Officer at Dutch. Join us every Tuesday as we bring you expert insights, cutting-edge research, and practical tips to help you take control of your health from the inside out. Whether you're a healthcare professional or simply looking to optimize your own well-being, we've got you covered. The contents of this podcast are for educational and informational purposes only. This information is not to be interpreted or mistaken for medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Dutch Podcast. I'm so excited for you to join me in today's conversation with Dr. Shahzadi Harper. Dr. Harper is a London-based physician, and she really has worked in women's health for a long time. And the thing that was so special about this conversation is just how real she is. We talk not only about some really critical aspects of care for women in midlife, and really a lot of the things that are happening currently, like the use of GLP-1s and how to cut through all the information that's available online, but also really that kind of personal touch. It felt to me like talking to a girlfriend. It was a lovely, lovely conversation, and I learned a lot. What you're going to hear about today are things like how our mood can change seasonally and how our nutritional needs, our movement needs, our sleep, all these things can change seasonally. And especially for women in midlife, we can be very impacted. Dr. Harper also talked a lot about hair care and how we can really support the changes in our hair, both seasonally and through midlife as our hormones change. We covered so much in today's episode. I really don't want to make you wait too long to get started with it. Now, Dr. Harper is a leading voice in women's midlife health. She has over 20 years of experience helping women through things like menopause, perimenopause, PCOS, and other aging-related challenges. She's incredibly proactive with a real preventive medicine point of view and really understands what women want, both that living the best life professionally, in our relationships, physically, and even caring about things like our skin and our hair and how we can really be our best selves. As both a clinician and a woman, she really brings empathy and a holistic approach to her patients' journeys. She's been featured on major TV channels and in publications like Vogue and Grazia, empowering thousands of women to thrive at every age. So let's go ahead and meet our guest. Well, Dr. Harper, thank you so much for joining me today from a few time zones away. I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Jaclyn. Yeah. Thank you.
So I really want to start with how you became interested in really working with women and working with women in kind of more of an integrative functional practice and what impact it has in your practice to be working with hormones and women's hormones.
I mean, there are quite a few different reasons, actually. I think that one of the things is the gender inequality. I felt that there was, when women get to midlife, they were almost written off or people weren't listening to them. And I think there's so many different facets to midlife, which isn't just medical or symptomatic. It's not just hot flushes, mood changes. Nobody was joining the dots. And I think that one of the other things is the stress of midlife is often underrated or underestimated, and the impact of that on our physical and mental health. My mother has Alzheimer's, and I think that I very much saw how she deteriorated in midlife. And also being one of 6 girls, I also have 2 brothers, and I have a daughter myself. I think I really wanted to, sort of prepare the path for them. I'm the big sister, so. And there were a few vanity issues. One was that I was single, and I saw a lot of women around this age, midlife, age really quickly. There was an accelerated aging. There was an accelerated sort of weight gain process. And I looked at them and I thought, is this what's coming for me? And I really thought, well, nobody else is joining those dots and somebody's got to do it. And for me, there was all of those things came together. And I thought, as I'm approaching perimenopause, I also wanted to spend time with women, listening to them, and here in the UK, within the NHS, we have 10 minutes or so, within the consultation. And I think that midlife is also a time for reassessment, reappraisal. And I think I've always wanted to be a businesswoman as well as a doctor, an entrepreneur. I've always had lots of ideas. So it was really a culmination of all of that came together that I set up my own clinic so I could give women the time that they needed, give them the care that they needed, and also help them to be the best versions of themselves. I sometimes describe it a bit like a a Porsche car. I want women to have this great internal engine, and to look stylish and sexy on the outside, which I felt that midlife women weren't getting, at that point in time.
I love that picture, and I do love a Porsche. It's like my dream car. Absolutely. And I think that's a total great definition of like that well-functioning, high-performing. It's how we all want to show up in
Yeah.
the world, right? Well, I love that. And it's really an interesting piece that you bring together. You're making me think when I was first in practice, I had never really thought about this in recent times, but I was 27 when I started in practice. I was in a family medicine, startup, started my own business. And I remember most of my patients were midlife women. And you see them in that health transition time where they start to come forward with aches and pains, with kind of foggy brain fog, mood changes, all these symptoms that they've been brushed off and they come to see you. But I do remember having this profound thought of like, this being such a special time, even when I was in my 20s, where there was this transformation of relationships, transformation of priorities, and reprioritizing of the self, which even, 2 decades before, this is 20 years ago for me now, it was amazing to be able to like be a witness to a woman going through that metamorphosis, really.
Yeah, I mean, I often think of it a bit like, sort of a caterpillar, and, a cocoon, and a woman coming out as a butterfly. But I think the scary thing is, like when I was in my 20s, we would almost like 45-year-old or a 50-year-old woman would be sort of written off. You thought that was the end of your life. And
I
so for
know.
me, it was very much that thought process that why should women fall off this cliff? And I think in conventional medicine as well, everything is sort of here's a pill or here's this, we weren't really looking at all the other aspects. And for me, I did then some training in functional medicine. And I really thought, we need to go back to the core. We need to look at things like what we're eating, our nutrition, our gut microbiome, our lifestyle, stress, and really combine that all. Because I think before I did that, I didn't really, I don't know about you, but, growing up and becoming a doctor, you're a scientist. Things are very much black and white. And you think that you don't really realize the impact of psychological health on physical health. And I think I realize now, and that there's a lot more gray in between. There's a lot more. Things aren't so black and white. So for me, it is very much listening to her, understanding her symptoms, having a very preventative approach. I don't want to be reactive. I want to be proactive. And I want really women to be their best versions and entering into that next stage of life, thinking that it's going to be an amazing stage rather than you're written off. And, I don't think 10 years ago, Jaclyn, I would have said to you that this is the best stage in my life. I really don't think I would have said that. I would have thought that it was coming to a fizzling end and I was going to sort of be pushed into a corner. I didn't really think it would be so vibrant and so exciting and with new opportunities.
Yeah, I love that you say that, and I couldn't agree more. It's like a stepping into a new stage, a new sense of ownership, and we chatted about this before we kind of started the recording, but it's a really interesting time because women oftentimes, they might sacrifice their own career growth to raise their family, and they're moving into this age where their children are more independent. They also have still a lot of responsibilities and priorities, especially in a family life, because you may have aging parents, even if you don't have children. So the stressors change, but also there's a ability to kind of put some energy into your own health, into your own priorities. It can be really amazing.
It can, and I think the thing that happens is that because we haven't been prepared for this hormonal change, and it could coincide with your children going through puberty, and then you're going through your own sort of hormonal maelstrom. And I think that we have aging parents, and we are, I feel, this sandwich generation of women that really haven't had the role models before, of older women like our parents. Lived a different sort of lifestyle to us, and the impact of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause could be quite different. The expectations, I think, on women nowadays are much, much more. And so we're juggling a lot. And I think we haven't really been taught how much our hormones impact more than just our reproductive tracts. You know, we often talk about puberty, pregnancy, fertility, but really not that how it can also affect our mood, our appetite, our energy levels. And here we get to perimenopause, and it feels a bit of a roller coaster, and it can feel a bit unknown and daunting. And I think that perimenopause, I would say, is I think the hardest stage for most women, because you're going through this sort of transitional time and you're looking back thinking the best years of my life are over. You know, you're trying to cling on to your youth, not really thinking that, you know, sort of how it could be better moving forward. And you see things changing, your body's changing outwardly, your skin, your hair, you know, the body fat distribution changes. You sort of lose a little bit of your identity there. And you're thinking there's nothing left to look forward to. And I also think, you know, our bodies are a little bit less adaptable, less elastic. I often sort of say, you know, when we're in our 20s and 30s, the path we walk on is wider. And so if you have a little less sleep, or if you maybe have a little bit too much alcohol, or you party a bit too much, or, you know, the stress, your body can react to it a bit better. But here we are in our 40s, moving into our 50s, that actually the path becomes a bit narrower. So that 1 hour less sleep has a much bigger domino effect on us. You know, that sort of, so I think because our bodies are less elastic, less resilient almost in some ways at this point. But I think it's all about preparation, and that's what I think I'd like my daughter to know. And I think she's seeing that in me as her mum, that she's thinking, gosh, my mum's leading a, you know, sort of a more glamorous life than she ever thought that I could be, or almost slightly enviously, because there she is still, you know, sort of as a student studying, doing her first job, you know, a bit more sort of that drudgery that we might have had when we first came out of university and just having to work. And then she's thinking, here's my mum having you know, a much more sort of exciting life in some ways.
I think that's a really beautiful thing because, you know, really one thing that's interesting when we look at perimenopause and menopause, and we'll talk about the science and the hormones shortly, but I think this cultural framing is really important to talk about. When we look at some cultures like Japan or traditional tribal cultures, menopause experience is quite different than it is in Western cultures like the UK and America.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of that I think is how we relate to aging, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
love what you just said, because the subtext that I'm hearing is that maybe 10 years ago, our mothers would look at us in our 20s and think, those were the best days of my life. I wish I could go back. What I'm hearing you say now is that your daughter in her 20s is looking at you, you know, in that perimenopausal, you know, 40s stage,
Yeah.
saying, God, I can't wait till I get there. And what a frame shift that is, and
Yeah.
what a gift it is, you know, for all of us to have that shift a little bit happening.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a restaurant just last week and sitting at a bar with a friend, and there was these two younger women there, and we got chatting, and they were like, "Wow, we've got something to look forward to." They really were, and they were
That's
in their
sweet.
late 20s, and I thought that was really nice actually to hear that from them, rather than I think when I was their age, you know, looking at the older women, I was really sort of dreading that stage for me at that particular point.
Right. Yeah. I think, well, there was just a different connotation with it. So
Yeah.
when you have these women coming in with different perimenopausal symptoms, I think another challenge or reason they seek out care from providers like us is that they may have been dismissed by the conventional system. And
Yeah.
really, I think we can agree that from a science standpoint and like a medical science standpoint, we're so far behind in caring for women. That's starting to change. But I was listening to a podcast this morning with Melinda Gates, who was talking about women's health research in the United States, which is where she's based, of course. And it's still only about 1% of the funding goes to women's health research. And she brought up a lot of statistics, even in very conventional kind of hard science areas like cardiovascular disease, where when a woman presents to a hospital with a heart attack, she's 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed than men. And that's because it shows up a little bit differently, and the training is not equal between men and women. And, you know, so I think even on that conventional side, we're at a little bit of a disadvantage in a lot of ways. But then when it comes to the softer symptoms, like the things that you talked about, the mood changes, the memory
Yeah.
changes, it seems like
I
there's not a
think
lot
you
of
think
help.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said, I think a lot of it is because research hasn't been done on women, the investment hasn't been there. And I think, women are quite dismissed in those sort of early stages of perimenopause. I had a woman today in clinic being told by her doctor, you're too young, she's 44, and yet we know changes can occur, from your late 30s onwards. And so I think there is that sort of lack of awareness, knowledge, dismissiveness, and women do present differently. And even with metabolic health, one of the things I do in clinic isn't just look at your sort of your periods and your cycle and your hormones. It's looking at your future health. And I think that, the parameters are sort of set more for male health, whereas we need to think differently for women. Even when it comes to sort of pre-diabetes, when we're looking at, lipids, we need to sort of shift the goalposts a little bit to what is the normal range for women and be a bit more sort of intervention early. And I think especially with things like cardiovascular disease, because women do present differently, they do have different symptoms. And it's equally so here in the UK that they could easily be dismissed because they don't have those classic signs of crushing central chest pain that we get taught at medical school. And I think that is down to that lack of research and investment in women's health. You're absolutely right there.
So what are the chief reasons that women are coming to you in your clinic?
So they're coming because partly they've been dismissed by, their usual doctors, and, they are young. They partly want to be sort of ahead of the curve. They want to also have some understanding of what's going on in their bodies. They don't necessarily want you to sort of slap them with hormones or anything like that. They want to understand what's going on in their bodies. Is this normal? They want some validation that they're not going out of their minds. So they come in with more of a sort of the earlier stages ones want to have more of that understanding how they can manage it holistically. What are the interventions that they can do for themselves to help themselves? And then, yes, there may be an element of testing, what we do to look at what is going on in that snapshot of time. But like I said, that's sort of general. I often talk about sort of quick fixes for big wins. You might be surprised at how many women might be low in iron because they're having frequent periods, heavy periods, low vitamin D because they haven't realized that they need to supplement because it's not found in foods or you can't store it so well. And things like vitamin B12, they're just in the normal range. So for me, I really look at all of those factors and say to them, it's not good enough in midlife just to be within the normal range. We need to be optimal. And that's how we need to be thinking about midlife health almost as its own speciality. And then we do talk about adding in hormones to sort of top them up, to get them to feel they're normal, themselves, because often they've been dismissed by their doctors, even if they have had blood tests to say, oh, look, your hormones are normal. But if you're not feeling normal, that's not normal for you. And I think what we have to do is to personalize it, individualize it. And I think women come to me because they want that sort of personalization. They don't want that one size fits all. And they want to have know what their options are.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you tend to notice, I know like we're both, I'm in Boston, you're in London. This is the time of year where the weather changes dramatically, the lighting changes dramatically. Do you notice any kind of seasonal change in women, in your patients, like sleep or mood or energy and fatigue?
100%. I think when we're getting into sort of autumn or fall, as you call it in Boston, when we get towards that time of year, I think when daylight is less, I think it really affects women's mood. Seasonal affective disorder is very common. I think the other things is there's energy levels drop, fatigue is more common. And women are much, much more light sensitive when they get to perimenopause and menopause, so the daylight really impacts them. Also the weather, the greyness outside, it's not even like it's cold with a blue sky. It's that greyness can really affect mood, energy, and also sort of sleep quality as well. So I think there is a shift. I think it can sort of exacerbate some of those perimenopause symptoms like insomnia, like mood changes, like anxiety, energy levels. So you do see a shift, and you do see people, when it gets to springtime, how things can be more uplifting for them.
What are some of the things that you do with women to support them through that time? Because I see that too, and it's really it's like you're already climbing a hill, and now that hill's getting steeper as you're facing shorter days, colder weather, the desire to go out for a walk or do those things that, get out of bed to catch that sunlight. How do you help women through that to help them kind of stay engaged?
I think motivation is quite difficult, especially like you said, when it feels a bit dark and you're waking up to maybe more grey, dark days. I think, I would say that putting in small steps, not saying go for an hour's walk, but even if when you make your coffee, you step outside or open a window and you stick your head out, that would be really beneficial for you. It helps to sort of lower the cortisol levels just to connect with nature. I think that sense of community, engaging with other women around you as well, is really key. And I think, vitamin D, I very much talk about vitamin D supplementation is key. I personally have one of those SAD lights that I sit in front for 10 minutes, So I'm very much about little bite-sized things that are doable and achievable. And I think for women that I would say to them, it's about small steps. Don't set yourself too high expectations. Don't think, oh, I'm going to go for an hour's jog around the block, or I'm going to do this or do that. I think, go for a walk with your dog if you have a walk with your dog, even those kind of things that will help to lower those stress levels. And I think really try and implement a good sleep hygiene, sort of, or wind down routine. So to help with your circadian rhythm and help with that melatonin production. So I think, little things that maybe, sort of a facial massage or just a foot massage, just before you go to bed, I really sort of encourage them to do a little bit of sort of 5 to 10 minutes of doing something like that to really help them wind down. Think about, cutting down on alcohol, cutting down on caffeine, especially in these winter months or so. So I think it's about sort of implementing little baby steps, but lifestyle measures that can help support them. And I think engaging with other women and sharing is really key.
I love that you bring that up. And I mean, I think we have to remember that people are a form of medicine to one another.
Yes.
And no better example than women friends. If you are a woman who's not connected to other women, that is probably something that you should work on even for health purposes and mental health purposes, is building a community of like-minded women. And it can be as easy as connecting with something that you like to do, like a pottery class or a yoga class, or go for a hike, or, find a way to get together with people doing the same things.
Even like
that
a
you're
book
doing.
club, even a book club, and then you could do a Zoom book club or something like that. But I think that connection is really important, and I think you feed off each other's energy. Plus, you understand that you're not alone in feeling the way that you are. And so yes, I think that connection is really key.
And I love the points that you bring up of these small suggestions, because I think sometimes I see women come in and they really want to get things right, and they go for a sprint right out the gate, and you can't keep that up, So I usually say, don't think about getting a bullseye. Just think about hitting the dartboard. Like, what's one thing that you can be successful with? And I really love that you mentioned sleep hygiene, because I think especially in the winter months, possibly our need goes up, as we have more darkness, to be getting to bed at the same time or getting up at the same time. It could be something as easy as that. I love that idea of, picking just those small things, like you said.
I love your analogy of a dartboard, because I actually do have one.
Ah,
And it's so interesting what you've said about, just aim for the board, not the bullseye. And I think that's actually true for so many things at this point in life. Just aim to do it. You don't have to do it perfect. Sometimes, I say, look, when you aim for 10 minutes, if you do 15 minutes, it's great. But if you aim for 15 and do 10 minutes, then you tend to feel more of a loser rather than a winner. So I'm all for that winning mentality and, setting the expectations which are achievable. But the dartboard analogy made me smile because I thought, I sometimes go and throw a few darts for fun, but I haven't heard anybody else say that.
that's good. That's great. Yeah, I had one patient who owned a gym. She was very into fitness, and she was probably in her 40s when I met her. Now she's in her early 60s, and she's still fabulous and looks great. But one of the things that she had said with her fitness people, which I think exercise is one of the toughest things to get women to engage in if they've not done it before. We can talk about that. But she would say, don't encourage them to go to the gym. Just encourage them to put their shoes on, and that was her way of saying the same thing. The hardest bit is the very first bit. So she would say, put your shoes on and come and commit to 5 minutes. And if you do the 5 minutes. You can go if you want to, but 99% of the time, once you're 5 minutes in, like, you're not regretting that you did that. Then you do more time. It's that inertia to kind of get off the ground that's so difficult.
I'm with you on that. It is. Sometimes what I do is when I'm working from home, I'll put on my sort of gym kit. Because I think at some point I'll do something. Whereas if I don't put it on, I probably won't do it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So another area that I want to talk about, which you mentioned on your social media recently, is hair changes. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Dr. Harper. You have gorgeous, gorgeous hair. And if you're just listening, just take my word for it. Tell me a little bit about like what you're seeing in women for hair changes through midlife, through that perimenopausal transition.
Yeah, so I think I see a lot of women who've noticed that, maybe their ponytails have got thinner, there's more hair in the shower plug hole, their partings have got wider, but also that the hair has become more dry, more brittle, and it doesn't seem to be growing in the same kind of way. And I think that what people might see as outward changes really do affect women's mental health, their confidence, their self-esteem. And I never really thought I had great hair, I'll be honest with you, because as I said, I've got 5 sisters and they've always had really great hair. So I've not been near the top of the list in that sort of hair scale. But, I often see women who have put up with symptoms of hot flushes, sweats, joint aches and pains. But when their hair starts to change, they're starting to bang on the door because it makes a big, big impact on them. So, you do see a change in your hair because of estrogen decline. You may also, as I mentioned earlier, not have realized that your iron levels have dropped because your periods have become more frequent or heavier. And even if it's just a bit of spotting, but it's happening much more frequently, your iron levels could be suboptimal. So I think I do see a lot of women like that. I think adding back some hormones can help. I think optimizing your supplements, like for example, my iron levels aren't below the normal range or even below mid range, but I now have a little pill box which I put my supplements in, and I'll take an iron supplement 2 or 3 times a week. I know that I'm not going to eat enough red meat. I know that it's hard to get my iron out of green vegetables, and also, like many women in this time, worried about weight and weight gain. So I often say that many women might be eating good food, but maybe not enough. And so I do encourage them to take a few more regular supplements. So for me, I also like to oil my hair. That can also be part of your sort of wind down, calming mindfulness routine if you want to, and scalp massage. So there are lots of little tips and tricks that you can do to really try and boost your hair growth. I have this little £5 sort of scalp massager from Amazon, which I massage using into my shampoo in. But also I think things that like the scalp microbiome. We know that as estrogen changes, our gut microbiome changes, but also our skin and our scalp microbiome. So using something like an anti-dandruff shampoo, like a Nizoral or something like that once a week, they are just like a quick fixes for big wins, or bigger wins than you may have realized. And also not overwashing your hair. I don't know about you when you were younger, maybe you were washing it every day or every other day. Now I tend to only wash my hair twice a week. So I'm very encouraging towards women that you can boost your hair growth. And also stress has a big factor. And going back to what we were saying at the beginning, this is a very stressful time of life for so many different factors. And so stress, I think, also things like relationship breakdowns. Relationships are impacted, maybe at work there may be issues, financial stress, your children are going off to university, your parents are demanding your time. So I think stress management is also key for hair growth and hair maintenance.
We'll be right back with more. If you're already running Dutch tests in your practice or thinking about it, there's never been a better time to become an official Dutch provider. Why? Because we go beyond lab testing. Our provider community gets exclusive access to clinical education, in-depth report interpretation training, monthly case reviews, and one-on-one clinical support. Whether you're just getting started or looking to sharpen your functional hormone expertise, we give you the tools to grow. Join thousands of providers already making a difference. Visit DutchTest.com today. We're back with the Dutch Podcast.
Yeah, those are really amazing points. And the hair care piece, you're totally right. What might have worked for you in your 20s might not work now with hair care. I have really curly hair too, so I'm in a similar boat. And it's funny, my husband's English. I told you that. He takes baths, like 2 baths a day, and he shampoos and washes his hair twice a day. And he's gonna love that I'm sharing all this right now. But he sometimes asks me, why aren't you going to wash your hair? It's like, you can't. I don't have your hair. It's like easy when you're a man. And it's like, but your hair changes so much.
But
It
also,
can be
the
so
other thing
dry.
is when our estrogen levels start to decline, I mean, I often call estrogen that hero hormone, and when it drops, it means that everything dries. Your skin becomes dry. You might get dry eyes, dry mouth, vaginal dryness, but also your hair dries. So we don't need to wash it as much because our hair is not so oily. It's not needing that washing in that same kind of way. In fact, it probably needs a bit more hydration, a bit more oiling, a little bit more sort of looking after. And I think that, it's time to invest in your hair a little bit. Think about, you're only going to wash your hair maybe once or twice a week. So get yourself a nice shampoo, get yourself a nice hair dryer. Don't overdo using the styling products and things like that. So, I held off for ages, buying a Dyson hairdryer. Yeah, I bought one for my daughter, but I would not buy one for myself. And then I thought, hang on, I should really, invest in myself. So I did. And I know not everybody can afford that, but I'm just saying, buy the best of what you can.
Right. And I think when you think about that type of investment, it is a lot when you can buy a $20 hairdryer or a $500 hairdryer. But if your hair is important enough that it's going to send you in to see a healthcare provider because of damage, or you're going to spend all this money in a salon, you're right. It's almost like similar to what we do, where we focus on prevention versus intensive treatment. It is in a lot the same way. I bought myself one, but then returned it because I really wanted it. I thought about it for months. Then I finally bit the bullet on a Black Friday sale, which is like your Boxing Day. We have all these sales in America. Brought it home, and then I looked at it for about a week, and I was like, God, I just can't do it. I returned it back to the store. But maybe sometime I have to get someone to buy one for me, and I'll be talking to my mom about that.
No, I thought it was. It took me a long time to get myself there, but I don't regret it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now, I want to talk about a couple of other things and get your perspective on it with the hair changes, because there's a couple other things that sometimes we see, which is a rise in relative rise in androgen levels in perimenopause and menopause. As you get a lowering effect of estrogen, your testosterone and DHEA, they're coming down too, but maybe not so sharply. Is that another contributor for women, or how impactful can that be?
I think it is. It's that relative rise of androgen, and also I think the fact that it's not just testosterone, it's DHT, which is causing that shedding. So I think there is an element of that, and that's because of that hormonal imbalance. As estrogen comes up, there's that relative rise in androgens, and I think that it is correcting that balance that helps. And one of the things I say to women, it's not necessarily your testosterone level, it's that DHT, it's that metabolite of testosterone, which is 5 times stronger. And then we look at little quick fixes, like, for example, sort of blocking the enzyme converting testosterone to DHT, something simple like green tea, because it contains that the enzyme in there can really help sort palmetto. So sort of more natural ways of sort of helping to block it. And also, I will often do blood tests just so that we can see what the free androgen index is and what DHT is. So we know that what we are tackling.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other area that I wanted to ask you about, because in the United States, GLP-1s are so big. And you'd mentioned that a lot of women in this age of life, they are conscious about not wanting to gain weight. They may be eating less. And so that restriction of reduction in caloric intake can also trigger hair loss, like a telogen effluvium, especially with GLP-1s. There's all this research coming out that 3 or 4 months into GLP-1 use, as women are losing hair, typically because they're under eating, they're getting a telogen effluvium reaction, which is essentially when the timing, this for people who are listening, I know that you know what this is, Dr. Harper, but for listeners that maybe just are patients, this happens post-pregnancy as well, that 4 months after pregnancy, where your hair kind of stalls in its normal cycle, and in pregnancy you retain it all, but then you lose a lot at once. And similarly, we're seeing that with GLP-1 use. Have you noticed that at all in your patients, or noticed the pattern with weight loss?
So I've been using a lot of GLP-1s with my patients because of insulin resistance and metabolic shift of perimenopause. And I think I'm very much that we use it as a tool and go slow and steady. And I think that, I forewarn them that, if we sort of run before we walk, then you will get this hair shedding. It's a stress reaction. Partly also you may not be taking in as much protein. You may not be taking in enough vitamin D. You may not be taking in enough iron. So I try and support them with some additional supplementation with it, but also very much have a more slow and steady approach. If you try and if you try and lose weight rapidly, decrease your caloric intake significantly, you will lose hair and you will also lose muscle on the GLP ones. But I would say haven't so far had a negative reaction from them. We tend to go more low dosing and micro dosing, but have had a positive effect on weight management. But very, I want to say touch wood, not so far on the hair loss
That's
side
great.
of things. Yeah.
Yeah, the benefits. I mean, we can talk about this too. This was not on. We didn't prep you for this conversation, but I know you're doing it all the time, and I think there's so much interest in this. And while the data was originally around type 2 diabetes and other metabolic conditions, we're seeing that even at those micro doses, those low doses, for women especially that tend to get more autoimmune diseases and kind of this immune dysregulation that happens, there's a lot of other side effects that I've been hearing in a positive way: mood lifting, energy levels rising, inflammation coming down, joint
Yeah.
pain going away. Can you share a little bit about what you've seen and like when you're thinking about using this for women in perimenopause?
So you use it sometimes in those very early stages, even before we add hormones in, because women will come in and their waistline are expanding. Maybe they've noticed a change in their metabolic parameters on their blood test, like the lipid panel. Maybe they've got a family history of diabetes. Very much I take into consideration all of those other aspects. Family history of diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, as well as sort of autoimmune conditions. And I think that what I've noticed is very much a positive response. Whilst, yes, there are side effects of the GLP-1s, maybe even what some might call the minor side effects, like the fatigue, the feeling cold. I think the overall is much more of an uplifting effect because they feel that something's happening. I would say most women that I see are not lazy. It's not like they're not trying lifestyle interventions. It's not that they're not trying to move, or as in they are moving, they're trying to do resistance, they're trying to look at their diet. But, it feels a bit like for them that they're pushing water uphill, and I think it becomes very demoralizing. So for me, I've seen such a positive effect on women, their mental health, their overall symptoms. It helps to manage some of those early perimenopause symptoms. They feel they've got more energy, and fatigue is such a common symptom in those early stages. But also then I might add it in as part of the menopause management, as part of their hormone treatment. So, it may be the third step or the fourth step. I tend to often go estrogen or progesterone, add one of those hormones. I'd like to do it in a stepwise way, tailoring it to each woman. Some women it might be progesterone, then estrogen. Some it might be estrogen, progesterone, maybe some testosterone, and then add in the GLP-1. And actually, one of the things about adding in a little bit of testosterone alongside it is to help maintain muscle mass and help to build muscle. So it's very much a sort of a combination approach. And I think women are really grateful for it because you're not having to pump them full of more and more hormone. They're getting the benefits of hormone treatment, but they're also then getting those metabolic sort of benefits of the GLP-1s. And the other thing is, why would somebody want to be on a statin and a blood pressure medication and maybe diabetic medication when you can almost get all of those effects in one medication, or you can have that preventative effect. So I'm using it as part of weight management, but from a bigger point of view, more of a health and longevity management and sort of a health optimization. So I'm really loving using them as part of women's healthcare in midlife and beyond. And I think they are a great tool for women, even in those low doses when women don't need to lose weight, but maybe there are other symptoms that could be helped with it.
Thanks for covering that so thoroughly. And really, we had a guest, Brittany Shammerhorn. She's a Canadian doctor who's done a lot of work on GLP-1s in women. And we really had a very similar conversation where, especially in midlife, the things that have always kept you well stop working. You know, that the way you eat and the way you work out may not be changing, or you might even be doing more, but seeing less results. And that can be, like you said, so demoralizing. And so, or maybe you're working with women who are really obese and have never started a program. Either way, that little tool that gives you the edge so that you start to see results builds confidence. It helps you build those lifetime habits. I mean, it's really interesting because it could be abused and used instead of the healthy changes, which probably is happening in a lot of communities. However, in functional medicine, where we're really focused on lifestyle, it's kind of an agent to, like, you know, give you a little kick in the pants on the lifestyle
I'm almost
factor.
sometimes telling some women to eat more
Yeah.
because they help your body to work more efficiently. And I think some women have been eating less and less and less, and their basal metabolic rate has been dropping and dropping and dropping. They're losing muscle mass. So sometimes I actually have to say to them, you need to eat a little bit more, you know, of the right things. And you're right. I think the worry is where potentially they could be abused. And that's why then you get the scare stories or the scaremongering. But when used correctly, they are a great tool.
So when we talk a little bit about some of the lifestyle changes, I'd love to get your thoughts around how these might be best implemented, like seasonally, you know, as we move into the fall. Let's start maybe with nutrition. Are there changes that you would recommend for women from a nutrition standpoint?
Yeah, I think because one of the things that can happen in these sort of autumn, winter months is women maybe get more carb cravings, you know, more needing that comfort food because of that mood boosting, you know, need some serotonin. So often, you know, women can sort of lean towards more sort of those sugary type foods. And I think managing your blood sugars and blood sugar balance is really key. And so I think, you know, one of the things I also use, you know, for our continuous glucose monitors to help women as a tool. And now might be a time of year which it might be a helpful time to sort of use them. You don't have to use them all year round, but now might be a good time of year to use them. And I think really to look at those sort of serotonin or dopamine boosting foods for you as well. And I think that looking at your diet, you want to have some of that comfort. And I think carbs are important, especially in the evenings when you want to sort of have a good night's sleep. So don't deny yourself them. But, you know, really think about protein. Look at vegetables. You know, maybe salads are a bit harder to eat because the weather is colder outside, a bit grayer. But, you know, I think roasting vegetables and things alongside your protein. So getting a good source of fiber can be very, very helpful, especially at this time of year, because it can be difficult to get the right food nutrition in. So prepping can be good, and maybe some batch cooking can be very helpful.
Do you have any favorite things that you love to cook in the fall?
I love sweet potatoes. I do love sweet potatoes, any form of sweet potatoes. I do love that. I do just love roasting lots of vegetables together, you know, and then you know, keeping them in a glass jar or you know, sort of dish for a few days, and then you can sort of add in your protein source with it. And the other thing I love is salmon, so a great source of omega-3 as well. You know, a bit of soy, garlic, chili, and it's an easy one to do when you come back from work because it's sort of 10-15 minutes. You know, it's not that you're standing there forever cooking. But also cooking for me is a bit of sort of mindfulness and wind down at the end of the day. As long as it's not a chore. And, you know, like I said, if you've done some batch cooking or some prepping and there's only a small amount that you do, actually it can be a nice way to sort of wind down at the end of the day.
I love that too. It really can be something that you can put intention into. Like, it can be meditative if you're, you know, and I have 5 kids at home. That my oldest is a senior in high school. My youngest is in first grade. So they're very split in ages. We're running everywhere. But on weekends, I typically like to do, because I love to cook, I like to do some of those slower cooking methods. And that helps me prep for the week so I'm not rushing around feeding junk. But a couple of things I love too, just to add for listeners, are like soups, especially in the fall. My family's French. My grandmother lived with me growing up. There was always soup. We had like soups for breakfast. I didn't eat traditional American breakfast foods. And so this time of year, I'm always craving like the lentil soups and the bean soups and, you know.
Well, I make a lot of dal because my family's
Yes.
from Pakistan originally. So I love to make dal. So that is something I will make a big pot of on Sunday and then for me, it's a nice lunchtime food for me, and I think that is, yeah. So I suppose I do the equivalent of that, and I do make sort of curries, but I suppose with a more of a modern twist. So lower fat, higher protein, those kind of things, and a lot more vegetables involved in it. So yeah, and soups are great because they're warming, they're filling, and sort of generate that heat within your body as well. So yeah, no, I might turn to making a few more soups, but I do also like one pot cooking.
Oh yes,
Something that,
definitely.
yeah, I do like that too.
Yeah, we took out like the crock pot, or if you have a big like iron crock, this is a time to do that where you like put the food in, let it cook all day.
Yeah.
Definitely. Another benefit to prepping food, when you talk about carbs especially, and I like this for perimenopausal and menopausal women, is oftentimes we think that when you cook the food fresh, it's going to be better. And in some ways it is. Like if you have a histamine intolerance, you need to watch cooling food and reheating because it can increase histamine. However, when you're cooking carbs, like if you cook rice or dal or beans or sweet potatoes, anything like that, if you refrigerate it and cool it, it actually changes the starches in the vegetable into more of a resistant starch, which is more of a fiber, and it slows that blood sugar impact of starches. So it makes them so much healthier. And I think when you're looking at women who are struggling with metabolic health or weight gain, that's another great advantage to meal prepping, is that you get the chance to cool them. And when you can still reheat them to eat them, but the cooling effect changes the starches in the carbs, which is really kind of an additional perk.
And I'll be honest with you, that's something sort of I've learned in the last few years. I think that's one of the things about conventional medicine. You don't get taught these kind of things, and actually it's so useful for women in midlife to have that more of that slower release carbs, sort of and blood sugar into the system, so you're not getting those spikes, you're not getting the insulin, it's not worsening the insulin resistance. So I think we're all learning. One of the other things I love about what I do is there's that continuous learning process going on, and learning from people like you as well, Jaclyn. It's like, it's great to be able to share that information, and I think that being able to put it together with integrative medicine, because conventional medicine often misses these things out.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a tendency to say, no, that's not true before
Yes.
you even know. It's like, if I don't know it, it can't be true. And there's there used to be at least kind of an arrogance to medicine. And I think the best doctors now are the ones that are learning from their patients, because now information is everywhere. It's been democratized. So I learn things from my patients all the time. And sometimes I have to say, I don't know, let me go verify that. Let me go
Yeah.
check that out
Yeah.
myself. But there's so much still left to know, and I
Yeah.
love that. Now, so we've talked about nutrition. I do want to talk again about movement with seasonality, because I think that's another thing. Again, we touched upon it, but it can be so much tougher when the weather is bad, or just when you have more darkness. I think about even just getting up early to get a workout in before work. Are there any tips and tricks that you have as the seasons change for women to kind of stick with that? Or do you
Yeah, I
think
mean, I
differently?
think I think even if it's like dancing at home, sort of putting some music on, dancing. Music boosts the serotonin levels. We know that, dancing, breaking a little bit of sweat helps to improve mood, especially sort of things like mild depression and things. So I think, again, for me, it's about not making it long, even and doing it with somebody. So funnily enough, at the weekend, I said to my partner, I said, look, can you help me out here? So this is me saying this. I said, can you help me out here? Because it's quite hard to motivate in the morning. Can we just do 10 minutes of weights? I said, even if it's just arms and squats, that's all we need to do. But I just need someone to do it with, because I think it's hard to get up and do it on your own. And so that was, funny enough, the conversation I had with him. And I said, all we need to do is 10, 15 minutes, but just that we need to do it together. So I think, finding yourself a buddy, even if it's a friend online or somebody that you text in the morning, are you up, or something like that, or at some point in the day, or meeting somebody to go for that walk with, or that jogging with. And the other thing I quite like is because everybody worries about getting these 10,000 steps, and get so obsessed about about these 10,000 steps. Something I've come to quite like is Japanese interval walking, whereby you're doing that 3 minutes of fast walking and then 3 minutes of just normal, 3 minutes of fast. And then you've got your equivalent of 10,000 steps done in 30 minutes. But, look, even if it meant you did it in 2 lots of 15 and you got out at lunchtime, in your break or something, but I think you could do that with a friend. So I think buddying up is really good, making it short and snappy. And maybe just invest in a little bit of sort of outerwear that, even if it's a bit wet and drizzly, you can still get out there. And I always put a hat on because, again, I don't want to come back and have to wash my hair or something like that. So I think those would be my tips. But, also think about things that you can do inside, even if what it is like dancing to music. I love a bit of hula hooping. And I think you don't have to go and spend money on lots of weights and things. You can do body weights like squats, or if you've got those elastic bands. But I do think in these months, one of the things is the hardest part is that motivation. So finding somebody to do it with. Like I said, I even said to my partner, please just do this with me. It was almost like pleading with him, please do this with me, because I could see how things can fall by the wayside. And then weight can increase, especially then you start to eat because you're tired rather than because you're hungry, and then that can become sort of demoralizing when you feel that your weight is also expanding, especially the waistline.
Definitely. Now,
What about you? Any tips? What would you
for
from your end?
movement, I think, well, I've done a lot of the things that you've mentioned. Like I actually had a colleague, another doctor who lives in Michigan, which is 1 hour earlier than me. And I was just having trouble when my children were young, fitting in a workout. And so I buddied with her. She was in a different time zone, but we found a time that worked well. And we would set up FaceTime cameras and like work out together on FaceTime. And it gave us that connection, but we didn't have to leave our homes. That was one
And
that was
also
really
accountability.
accountability.
When
Right.
you've got somebody, you've got to show up. Even if you feel you don't want to show up, but you have to show up for them, because otherwise you'll feel like you're letting them down. So there's that accountability, and I think that's also a good thing about sort of buddying up.
Yes. And the other thing I would say is finding things that fit in your lifestyle. Like we are about a half a mile to my children's school. We walk them every day. We walk there and back. We could drive. A lot of parents drive. We live on an island. It's very small, but we walk when we go out, and it's only 10 minutes each way. But when I've gotten home, that's 20 minutes of walking. I'm about, I'm part of my way there. And then if I can get a break during lunch to walk for 30 minutes, it's easy for me to get those pieces in. I think the biggest tip is just, I would call it habit stacking. And
Yes.
that's probably been the piece that's been the big unlock for me is when it comes to nutrition, to hydration, which we haven't talked about, but drinking enough water is so critical. I have my things. I have like my vitamin powder, like right when I wake up, I mix it in a certain amount of water. I drink it while I have a cup of tea. And then when I work out, I have another drink, 32 ounces that I drink. And then in the evening before bed, I have a magnesium powder. Those, for me, a couple of things are like I hate taking pills. I hate swallowing tablets, but I'll drink pretty much anything. So I'll mix my different vitamins and magnesium and things like that and get that through drinking. And then it also allows me to make sure I get enough water during the day. But it's the stacking.
I think the habit stacking again for me as well, and I think it's also about keeping it real.
Yes.
Even if whilst you're making your coffee in the morning, you're standing on one leg to help with your balance or something like that. I think it's getting those things in that that you can do and achieve. I think setting too big sort of challenges, you're not going to do that. But I think, like you said, those. For me, I put in my creatine in my coffee, have some collagen, electrolytes, and like I said, my little pill box, I do quite like the pills, so, and that's also interesting because for people to know what they like and what they don't like as well. You like the powders, but that also means that you're getting the hydration at the same time. Which actually is quite good because again, it's like a 2-in-1. I love these kind of things that you can do where you're getting double the benefit by just doing one thing in a way.
The other thing I think is critical is the community aspect of it. So like I commit to going to one yoga class a week in person, even though I have all the tools to work out at home. all the videos and things like that. I go in person once a week more because I want to be around other people that are doing the same thing. There's something to that, even if they're not your friends. So I think that's another piece that I would say for a woman in midlife is impactful.
Yeah. And like for example, yesterday, when I was in clinic, instead of going to the closest tube station to me, or I went to the one further along, particularly as it had been quite an intense day, and I thought I haven't really had a chance to get out and walk, and it wasn't necessarily about the steps. It was actually a really lovely day yesterday here in London, and I just wanted to be around people, and it was a lovely evening, and I just wanted to walk along the streets. So it was more than just for the steps. It was more for the energy, the feel, and I really enjoyed that. And I thought I should do a bit more of that sometimes. Just go to the next tube station, because it wasn't actually that challenging to do. So sometimes you might think, oh, it's much further to walk there or do this, but once you've done it once, you realize actually it's not as bad as you think.
And walking especially, I love that you said that you did it for the experience, because exercise should be something we enjoy, and like walking, it's not a punishment, and I think a lot of times I saw this really funny clip from the New Yorker, this cartoon that I posted on my social media, and I got a ton of responses where these aliens flew down to Earth, and it said apparently their life wasn't hard enough because women even started wearing weights when they went out for walks, And no, not weighted vests are great. They have a lot of benefits, but it has to make you laugh. Not everything has to have a purpose. Not everything has to be have a return for you. Going for a walk without headphones in, where you're just listening and looking and breathing and appreciating. Like in our neighborhood, we have these little bunnies that sometimes run around, or what flowers are in bloom, or what the sky looks like. Just being present, I think that walking meditation is amazing. And that is something that it doesn't always have to be fast. You can have a little mosey.
No. And it was a really enjoyable walk. Like I said, London is beautiful. It was a lovely day. I had no agenda, and it was just a nice walk to the next tube station. And I achieved some steps in the process.
That's right. Well, I love that. It's like adding that intentionality to your life. Yeah. I think one last question I have for you before we wrap today, and this has been awesome. It's like talking to a girlfriend. You're so wonderful to talk to. I can see why your patients probably love you so much. You've talked about a wind down routine several times in the night. You've got to share, what's your wind down routine? Because I'm so curious, because you've mentioned so many beautiful rituals as part of it.
Yeah. So for me, I am somebody who is, very mentally active from almost the point that I wake up. And then I hit a wall. Like I used to say to my daughter, do not come and ask me anything serious after 8 p.m. because my brain is like a vegetable at that point. So, as I mentioned before, coming home, I have my dog. He's always very welcoming. But then, cooking is very much my part of my process of winding down. I do like to then just chill out with my partner and just I may do like one of the things I find, because I do a lot of talking, as you probably do, is that I get a bit of jaw tension. So part of my wind down routine will be sort of just to use some facial oil and just massage, sort of massage my jaw. I also have a LED mask for my face, and so I'll put that on for 10 minutes and watch TV. And then the other things I do sort of is make sure that I have a big glass of water when I walk in through the door, before anything else, because I know that probably I haven't been as good as you, Jaclyn, at getting my hydration in during the day. So, but I don't want to do it too late at night, because then I don't want to have to wake up in the night to do that. So there are sort of little baby steps that one does, and then I will watch some TV. Just chill, watch an episode of something or another. At the moment, I'm addicted to Breaking Bad, which I'm sure everybody's watched, and I'm the last one to the table.
I only saw the first season. Maybe I'll join back into that with you.
It's like, maybe I'm just late to the table a little bit, but I seem to be addicted to it. And then, like I said, I like to do a bit of facial massage and I like silence. So I don't want to talk in the evening. And I met my partner online, and on my dating profile, one of the things I'd written was, I'd like to meet somebody I can sit in silence with. So I don't want to necessarily talk to somebody. I just want to wind down. It's almost a bit meditative, sort of that sort of whole process. And sometimes I may have a cup of milk, because I think that's also quite nice from the sleep point of view, melatonin point of view. And my bedtime routine, I'll take magnesium. I'll probably take my vitamin D as well in the evening, and then I do wear an eye mask to sleep because I feel that it helps to boost the melatonin. Okay, because I think that really helps, and it gives me a good quality of sleep. So there aren't that many steps to it, but it's just become so natural in a way, like you said about the habit stacking. I think it's become so natural, sort of this whole wind down. But also when I come home, I will change out of my work clothes into more relaxing loungewear type of clothes, and cook, eat with my partner, watch a bit of television, get my magnesium, my LED, wash my face, get all the grime out of London out of it, put my LED on, boost the collagen in the skin, and wear my eye mask, and I do try and go to bed at about 10 to 10:30, between 10 and 11 p.m, and then I'm usually up by about sort of 6:37.
Fabulous. Well, Dr. Harper, it's been really great to have you on today. I really appreciate your time. If people want to learn more about you, what are the best ways for them to do that?
So I've got a website, www.theharperclinic.com, but do follow me over on Instagram at Dr. Shahzadi Harper, and you'll get all the information from there.
Wonderful. And we'll put those links in the show notes for you guys listening as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Harper, and thank you guys for listening today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Dutch Podcast. Join us every Tuesday for new conversations with leading functional health experts. If you like what you've heard, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.